Hello and welcome back to Excellence Actually. I'm Clay Skipper, one of your hosts, joined by Brad Stahlberg and Steve Magnus. This weekend is the New York Marathon. It's the fourth of the now 7 world major marathons. Sydney, Berlin, Chicago already happened. Tokyo, Boston, and London will follow New York and happen in the spring. We happen to have a guy, you guys might know him, Steve Magnus, who is something of an expert on running. He's coached over 24 Olympic qualifiers, including the top American woman, Natasha Rogers, at the most recent Chicago Marathon. If you want to go deeper into Steve's running, he's got a great YouTube channel devoted to running, a great book on running. So, partially selfishly, because I'm running the New York Marathon this weekend, we thought we'd have him run us through some of the ins and outs of doing a marathon. But this is the most important part. This isn't just for people running the New York Marathon or marathons. It's not just for runners, because as you'll hear, and as you know, if you're a runner, you do any sort of endurance sports, there's a lot of crossover navigating the challenges of a marathon and the challenges of life, right? How to navigate nerves, how to set expectations, how to do something really hard for a long time, maybe even when you don't feel like you're making progress or you don't want to do it, how to see something through, how to not give up, how to manage discomfort, how to deal with disappointment, on and on and on and on the list goes, right? So we are going to get a lot of great tips on the marathon, on running, on endurance sports, and how to manage pain and difficulty, but we're going to extrapolate that out and make it relevant to you in whatever you perform at, whether that's surgery, teaching, coaching, doing some sort of craft. You always try to generalize these lessons out, and I think we will do a great job of doing that today. So let's launch right into it. Let's talk about expectations. On our last episode, all about managing fatigue, we talked about this a little bit, right? How the conversation you have with yourself about how hard something is going to be really has a huge effect on sort of your perceived exertion while you're going through it, and that affects your motivation, right? So let's start there, Steve.
This is where people screw it up so much, because often the advice you get going into marathon is like, go for your goal, shoot for the stars, like think big, like go after it, especially if you spend too much time on social media. And what that does is it sets you up for disappointment, because no matter how fit you are, the marathon is going to get hard. And the way expectations work is they essentially establish a framework, a map for your brain. Your brain goes like, okay, I should feel this way at mile 5, at mile 13, at mile 20, and it uses that as a kind of blueprint. Well, if you give it the wrong map and say, hey, we're going down the yellow brick road and it's all gonna be all cool, guess what? When it's not, when that wicked witch shows up, like reality smacks you in the face and your brain says, hit the eject button, get out of here. This isn't what I signed up for. Alternatively, if you say, this is going to be the hardest freaking thing I've ever done in the world, as we talked about in the fatigue episode, your brain goes, well, if this is the hardest thing I've ever done, then I'm going to make that alarm sound really, really early. And I'm going to make you so hesitant and so cautious that you never come anywhere close to your potential. So the reality is, on expectations, you want a kind of realistic optimism, or realism coupled with a little bit of hope. And what I would say is that hope, you want to set yourself up for it to slowly, gradually build over the long haul. What does that look like practically? It means, first off, setting a realistic expectation on how the marathon will feel. Meaning the early miles, yeah, you might feel fresh, but you're still going to know you have 20 more miles to go. So you're going to feel some nerves and anxiety. Okay. You're going to feel some anxiety around starting the race. You've got to set that appropriate expectation. This is why often with pros and, experienced athletes, they kind of visualize part of this in their runs leading up to it. What's it going to feel like? What's the experience like? The other part of it is, when you're setting expectations, I think, is the key part, which is pacing. So much when it comes down to running is setting the expectations for the pace. What am I going to be at per mile? What am I going to be at halfway? And here's my pro tip. As a coach, even when I'm super excited about someone's training, whenever I saw Natasha Rogers preparing for Chicago, we were pumped about her training. It had gone really well. What did we do? We took what we kind of expected she could run and then said, yeah. we're going to come through halfway, maybe about 30 to 40 seconds total slower than that. That's only a few seconds a mile. But what that did is it gives you a buffer for reality, because the reality of the marathon is this. You want to make it long enough, feeling good enough where your brain starts to convince you can actually get to the finish line and have that hope of accomplishing the goal, of getting that PR, of doing whatever you set out to do, that hope growing over time and not hitting that like panic, doom, I'm in trouble early.
I think also it's really important to note that it can be equally as hard when it's feeling easy in the early part of a race. Again, whether this is a marathon or this is a metaphorical race, a new job, taking out a craft, writing a book, whatever it might be. Anytime you have like an event of endurance, you have all of this hype coming up to it about how hard it's going to be. And it's going to be hard, but it shouldn't feel peak hard right off the bat, because you're never going to make it. And like once you start falling in a hole, it's so much harder to climb out than it is to be above the hole and keep building on that momentum, like Steve said. So I think that, yes, we spend a lot of time talking about expecting it to be hard and realizing that the later miles are going to feel terrible and being okay with that. But we don't talk about making sure that those early miles feel easy, and you don't freak out about how easy they feel and think, oh my gosh, I did all this training. Like today's the day. I'm just going to send it. And then you end up sending miles 0 to 9. And then the middle miles start to feel like mile 20. And then by the end of the race, you're on the side of the road, on a curb, because you've got nothing left in the tank. And I just think like so often for any endurance event, whether it's physical or psychological, we've got to be patient. And to Steve's point, like you need a map, and parts of the journey are not going to feel hard. And the hard part is going to be being okay with them not feeling hard, not forcing the issue early on.
Steve, let's get granular for a second about like thinking through that map. Do you coach runners through, okay, here's what you should be thinking about or what you should be focusing on miles 1 through 5, 5 through 10, 10 through 15? Just curious how you think through like chunking that and sort of drawing that map.
Yeah, so every individual needs to have their own kind of customized map given what they know and their experience that they're bringing to the table. So I think that's step one. I think in general, the first couple miles are going to feel often really good because the gun went off. You're excited. Everyone's going crazy. So your key there is not only patience, but also being like, I need to lock into my rhythm and ignore everybody else. Because too often we get dragged out into a faster pace or a faster pack those first couple miles. And then at mile 4 or 5, we look down, we see the split. We're like, oh, this group is the 3-hour group. And I was trying to run 3:20 and we've already committed, and then we freak out. So I think the first couple miles, set it up. Find your rhythm, ignore everyone else. After we get into that kind of heart of the race where we're like miles, 5 until getting close to halfway, the way I like to describe it is find your people and turn your brain off. What does that mean? Like you can spend all day freaking out, thinking about what's to come, thinking about how am I going to feel at halfway. But really, if you find your rhythm, you find your people, you find your pack, like your goal is to just sit there. You want to think of yourself as Eliud Kipchoge sitting behind the flock of pacers that he has. And he's just saying, whatever pace they go, I'm just sticking on this guy. Like all I have to think about is staring at the guy in front of me and his shoulder blades and looking at that. Now, for each individual person, how you turn your brain off, that's going to differ. Some people like to stare at the person in front of them and just like forget it and zone out. Some people like to literally count steps. That sounds crazy to me, but some elite athletes do that. Some people like to distract themselves in the early miles and say, this is the pack, and I'm going to take in the scenery. Okay. And then as we get around halfway, what I tell people is there's a point where you're going to start to have to engage. So from like 13 to 17, 18 is what I call the engage zone, which means it's going to start to get hard, but you're still far enough away where you don't know if you're going to get there. So during those periods, you focus on the things that keep you engaged in the race. Am I fueling? Am I taking my, maybe gel with caffeine? Am I on my pace? Am I competing against other people and like staying with this thing? And then once we get to the kind of God knows what happened phase, which is like 17 to 22 ish, this is where it's a little bit survival, but I like to call it like, you just got to pull out every trick in the book to stay as close to as possible as your pace, as your competitors, whatever you're trying to do. This is where I'm sure we'll talk about, you get into strategies like chunking things, you get into bargaining, hey, make it one more mile or make it to the next turn or stay on this person when they go past me, talking to yourself, dedicating that mile to someone you love and care about. You're just trying to get to that point. And then from, like 21, 22 to the finish, my general rule of thumb is just kind of like trust yourself and just let it go. Meaning like whatever is there, right? There's no saving you at 22, 23. There's no Superman coming in to like give you a boost of performance. You can do some certain things, but you just got to kind of like say F it and grind it out and grit your teeth and use every tool in the toolbox and just like take what is there. And often my coaching advice is once we get past, we're in the spot. And once we get past like mile 21, 22, you stop looking at the watch and you start competing. And you just pick people and you say, let's grind and go with them. Let's try and catch that lady. Let's do whatever it is to like stay in this race so that I can make it to the finish.
There's a few things in there I think are really interesting that I want to pick up on. One is just, I think turning your brain off in the first part of it gets at this idea we've talked about before, which is a really interesting one, which is that like cognitive and mental challenge or stress has a physical equivalent, right? So like if you can't turn your brain off and you're wasting that sort of mental energy of like thinking all the time, that actually affects your body, right? And I think that is, again, to extrapolate out to life, that's just like an interesting lesson to take note of. Like, oh, if I'm spinning my wheels up here, it actually does have like a stressful effect on the body. The other thing in there I think is interesting, and I think is also another good lesson for life, is just the restraint you have to show at the beginning of a marathon to know that, I have to hold myself back in some way and not get overly excited for the first 10 miles so that in that mile 22, 23, 24, 25, I can still give like my best effort. And it's really like present you doing future you a favor, right? And I think this is like something I think of a lot with the marathon and the ones I've done is like, I often try to like the night before, for instance, try to get everything organized so that the morning of, again, I can sort of mitigate my mental stress because I'm like, I know what I'm wearing. I have all my gels laid out. I got all that. And it just like makes rolling into the marathon a little bit more seamless and easy. And this is actually like a almost one-to-one translation of how I think about working on a day-to-day basis. Like the night before, I try to lay out what I'm doing in the morning for the exact same reason of like, these are the tasks I need to get done. Because it's just this idea of like, okay, I'm going to take a little like hit of having to do some work now to help myself down the road. And so I think that idea of like thinking of present you doing future you a favor, whether you're showing restraint in the first few miles of a marathon, whether you're organizing tomorrow's tasks tonight, that's all a good exercise in delaying gratification.
Yeah, I think that's right. The only thing there that I would add is that at the same time, if for some reason those plans combust, you didn't get a good night's sleep, the weather's not what you thought it would be, the gel falls out of your little bag, you can't have, how do I say this right? You can't have eliminating stress become a source of stress.
Yes.
So it's good to eliminate stress, but if the act of eliminating stress itself becomes stressful, then it's just stress. So everyone is going to fall into the spectrum somewhere differently. And I think that you've got to find that kind of magic spot where you're controlling the controllables without fixating on everything needing to go a certain way. And then if it doesn't, the whole thing crumbles.
I think this also goes back to the expectations that we talked about. If you're sitting there imagining the perfect race and often visualizing the perfect race, that can set you up for a downfall. And this is why, again, with elite athletes and many of whom I've worked with, you often imagine things going wrong, right? And actually, I know some coaches, and I've done this myself, where it's like you intentionally knock the bottle over when they're trying to grab it in practice, right? Or you get in their way and you have something bad happen. So you can almost mentally rehearse what happens in a race if I don't get my bottle, if my gel falls, if I'm a little bit too fast. You've got to be not overly prepared for these things, but you've got to be able to say, okay, it happened. Great. It kind of sucks, but let it go and keep going because it doesn't define your race. I think most of the marathon, and I think this applies to life too, is this battle between like present and future you that you summarize there, Clay. There's so many things that present you can do to help future you. And there's so many things that, present you can do that really get in the freaking way of future you. And one of them is just like losing it and freaking out on something that just happened. And I think in the marathon, so often we talk about this, and we mentioned in our last week in our fatigue episode, is like run the mile you're in. But what that often means is that the mile you're in, what is happening right now, doesn't necessarily predict exactly what the next mile is going to feel like or what's going to even occur in the next mile. So if you miss that gel, you can't think my race is over. You're just like, whatever, next gel, I'll try and consume the whole thing. Like it's going to be all good. Like we've just got to keep going. And even this, like I'm feeling too effortful or it's too hard too early. Sometimes that can be a signal to slow down. But sometimes that can be a temporary signal of like, you're running 26.2 miles. Even if you're having a good race, sometimes you're going to have a bad patch. And if you just give yourself a couple minutes, you're going to get through that. So much of it is like, when do I use that looking to the future? And when do I like turn that off and say, no, how I feel now doesn't predict how I'm going to feel a couple miles. I just got to like keep at it and things can change.
One more thing to try to bring this metaphor further beyond the road and into life is the notion that Steve mentioned about finding other people and turning your brain off. I think what's really interesting about the marathon and where maybe the marathon is different than other parts of life is you can let the race come to you. So you can go out kind of easy and then you can settle in. And then if you're doing it right, maybe you're not really grinding until mile 14, 15, 16. A lot of other endurance events in life, you can't let the race come to you. I'm thinking of medical school, right? The first 2 years of medical school aren't easy. They're actually very hard. You start right at mile 18. You're taking a new job at a top-tier elite design or consulting firm. Again, there's no letting the race come to you. But what you can do is you can find the other people that are running your pace, and you can still get in their slipstream and share the work. I mean, that's literally what runners talk about. They talk about sharing the work. And the leader of the pack is doing the work. They're pulling. In cycling, this is, I think, where it originated. And then eventually that leader falls to second in the pack and someone else does the work. And it's akin to being in like a medical school cohort or study group where you're all in it together. And there are certain times when you just need to fall into the pack and kind of turn your brain off. What should we be studying at what cadence? And someone else is going to step up and take charge. And then there are other times when that is you that needs to do the work. But it still has the effect of you not needing to feel all the stress and hold all the stress yourself and you not needing to hold the entire cognitive load yourself.
I want to pick up on one more thing before we move off it, because I think there's an interesting parallel here from sort of as I put on my Eastern wisdom meditation hat. But Steve, you were talking about this idea of how you feel in one moment or in 1 mile may not be how you feel in the next and how these things can transform. And I think there's a cool parallel here with meditation, which is, and I won't go too deep into this, but when you sit down often and you get still and you try to focus on your breath, your brain runs away like a monkey. So they call it the monkey mind. And the instruction when that happens is you just gently notice it and place your mind back on the breath. And there's this mantra I like called begin again. And the idea is like you just do this over and over again, right? You try to do one thing, you get distracted, your mind wanders, you begin again. And I think there's a really nice parallel that has been helpful for me in marathon running of the same thing for a mile, right? Your first mile didn't go how you want. Sweet. It's a new mile, begin again. I mean, you can apply this to track workouts for intervals, every 400 meter, every 800 meters, just like begin again. And I think what's so cool about the marathon is you have 26 opportunities to begin again. And it's so cool to like be able to train that muscle of, okay, can I let that go? And can I open myself to what like the next mile has in store for me?
And you know what is great, especially for the New York City Marathon, is that you can tie some of those miles to like new things that you're going to experience. So you have a bad mile. You look down, you're split slow. It's easy to spiral. If you spiral, that's the worst thing you can do. If you can give yourself hope and say, it's a new mile, right? And it's a new mile. And guess what? I'm coming off the bridge and I'm going to get all the cheers in the world. And it's going to give me all this energy and I'm going to ride that energy. That gives you not only the fresh start, but something to look forward to. And the other thing that I've often seen is people tie it again to when they're going to see friends or family. Do you know that your friends or family are going to meet at mile 21 and you're struggling at 19? Guess what? You say, hey, 2 more miles and I'm going to get to see the people I love the most who came and supported me. Again, that gives you that fresh start and that jolt that energizes you through the hard parts.
Yeah, it's like those 2 charts that we often share where one chart, you think that progress is linear. So it's straight up into the right. And then the other chart is all squiggly. For our YouTube viewers, I've drawn this out. So we think that progress is the top chart, right? But in effect, it's the bottom chart. And this is true in a marathon. Like very rarely, Steve would know better than me, but I mean, every once in a while, someone's just like, from mile 1, I was just in the zone. But most marathons contain like all of these highs and lows. And when you zoom out, you want the overall 26 miles to be this build towards your best performance. But when you zoom in on each and every mile, some miles are better than others. And if every time you're at one of the others where it's not great, you fixate on it or you freak out or you're unable to begin again, then you get stuck there. I think about it in a powerlifting journey, right? You think about a sport that couldn't be more different than marathon running. But if you were to look at week to week or workout to workout and really like judge where you're going and your performance based on that, you'd be a total mental mess and you get in your own way. But if you look over the course of a year or even 2 or 3 years and you see this overall trajectory trending up, that is like what you really want to pay attention to.
Let's talk now about nerves. We frequently cite the research on the show that shows that reframing your nerves as excitement rather than anxiety can help. What are some ways to actually do that? How do we move from sort of that threat mindset where we're playing defensively, like, oh God, I'm scared, I don't want something to go wrong, to sort of the challenge mindset of, oh, this is going to be hard. Let's have fun. Let's see what happens. Let's see how I can handle it.
I think it starts with setting the expectations that we talked about earlier, but I also think it is about reminding yourself that you are prepared for the task at hand. Maybe not perfectly, but that you followed some sort of training program, that you've done the work to give yourself a shot. So often nerves get us because it's our brain essentially saying like, warning light, caution, caution, this is going to be really freaking hard, and kind of convincing us to not even start the race or not even start the journey. It's our exit ramp, right? And we've just got to kind of nudge back and be like, yeah, I'm not going to fight you. That's true. But I'm prepared. I've done the work. I've done the long runs. And almost looking back and saying, here it is on black and white. Here's my training log. Here's my Strava. Everyone gave me some kudos. I'm in a good spot. So I think that's number one. The other part of it, and I kind of touched on this, is like, if you fight it, they're just going to come back harder. So it's kind of like an acceptance of like, I'm not going to eliminate them. They're always going to be here. It's kind of gonna suck, but once the gun goes off, I'm probably gonna fall into normal action because I'm now doing something. So much of the nerves is the day or the hours leading up because you can't do anything about it. You can't start the race. So what I tell people is set the appropriate expectations, set the appropriate goals, and then figure out, how do I fill that space, right? Is that some sort of routine or ritual or warm up that I always do? Is that some sort of, I listen to music? Is this I've got friends here and I'm going to shoot the shit with them and joke around with them and like not be in my own head to get me to the point in the starting line until the gun goes off. The more you can kind of fill that space, the better off you're going to be.
First, I want to piggyback on something that Steve said, and then I've got a really important point to add. The wait till the gun goes off is obviously true in running, but it's true in just about everything in life. You've got a big speaking event and you're super nervous before on the ride over or while you're waiting in the little green room before they call you onto stage. Just like wait till the gun goes off. Like once you're up there talking about the thing that you know, you're going to be okay. And maybe you make it so the first couple minutes of the presentation are very comfortable and easy. No different than the first couple miles of a marathon, right? Like let the race come to you, groove into it. Before a big exam, right? Same thing. It's okay to be nervous. Wait for the gun to go off. Once the exam starts, you're not going to be nervous because your brain is now occupied by doing the exam. We talked about this earlier. It's Jan Ponsky's circuits. It's impossible to be problem solving or quote unquote seeking, what neuroscientists call a seeking behavior, moving towards something at the same time as it is to be freaking out. So this obviously applies beyond running. However, I think that a trap that doesn't have a name, at least that I'm not aware of, maybe we should name it on the podcast, that's really common and can really screw people up, is when you take those nerves that are happening before a big event and instead of accepting them, you start to freak out about them. And then you get nervous about being nervous. And then that spirals and it gets so acute and so intense that then you start to get despairing and depressed. And we know that the brain can only be super anxious and nervous for so long before it just tunnels into depression, despair. And nerves look a lot like excitement. It's okay to be really anxious or nervous on the start line of a race because that can get channeled into performance, into excitement. But if you're so nervous the day before the race that by the time you get to the start line of the race, you just feel despair and down, it's a lot harder to activate when you're feeling really like low or like in more of a depressive state. And something that often happens with high performers that care really deeply is it's like the worst kind of self-handicapping. The day before, the morning of their event, they get so nervous that by the time the gun's ready to go off, whether literal or metaphorical, they're just too freaking tired to give it their all. They're like sad. They're dreading the thing. And I think that this happens more often than we talk about. And you can be really nervous and perform great. It's hard to perform great from a place of dread or despair. And there's this pretty predictable path of being nervous, 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 and then that tunnels into dread. And I just think like the number one way to prevent it is back to expectations. Like expect that you're going to be nervous and then don't freak out about being nervous. Just let yourself be nervous.
And I think often where that dread comes from, and don't drill down the day of the marathon if you're a coach on this, but is it often has a source, right? It's in youth sports, it's the kid who thinks that if he loses, his parents are gonna be so utterly disappointed in them. It's the athlete who has tied their entire identity to like running this PR or making the Olympic trials or whatever it is in this thing that they can't zoom out and see that it's not life or death. And so much of preventing that nerves to dread is to frame it appropriately, where they see that, yeah, this is going to be difficult. Yeah, this is a challenge. Yes, I care about doing well, but this isn't life or death. This isn't my parents are going to disown me. This isn't my family, my coach are going to think that I'm worthless if I don't perform well. I've had to tell so many athletes like, hey, you're not letting me down if you perform poorly. Like, we'll figure it out. But often in the moment, especially if you're kind of that type A pusher, your brain can convince you that. So a lot of it is giving yourself that evidence and shifting your expectations to realize that, yeah, feels like life or death. Yeah, this feels like the most important thing in the world, but it's not really. It's just running. It's just whatever, giving a speech. People will forget about it a week from now, a month from now, a year from now. No one will even know it occurred. Like zooming out and understanding that like you're going to be okay.
Yeah, there's another short here like mantra or heuristic I have for this that I think has been helpful to me, but it's like relative action, absolute perspective, meaning like you take the next best step to try to put yourself in a position to be successful, but you couch it in this larger perspective of like, this doesn't really matter. I mean, you can extrapolate that out as far as you want. Like, we're all going to die one day. This doesn't matter, right? But like in the case of the marathon, it's like, this obviously really matters. It matters to you. You've trained, you've worked really hard, you're on the starting line. But in the absolute perspective, like, it's just running. And for a lot of people, you know, who are professionals, sure, it's their livelihood. And so it does matter more to them. But for most amateurs, it's just like, you're just running. And I'm not saying it's not important. I care a lot about running, but like just keeping this absolute perspective, I think is an important one.
Yeah, at the risk of getting Steve canceled on his own YouTube page, the only person that cares whether you went 249 or 251 is some anonymous asshole on the Let's Run billboard. Like, no one else cares. So, you know, and if you're good enough or you're competing for a championship or a title, then to get to that level, you've got to be able to deal with the nerves. So I think this is a problem that amateurs, I think, have more often than pros, because I don't think you become a pro until you figure this out. Maybe Steve's going to tell me all the pros are a mess too.
No, I think it happens to everyone. I think the pros like eventually have to realize this. And I can sit here, I won't name names, but I can think of many examples who have told me, you know, I have to remind myself, like, this is running. I'll use one example that she said publicly. Good friend Phoebe Wright, who just missed the Olympics a couple times, like, told me on multiple occasions and others that she'd sit there on the starting line when it was the biggest race of her career, trying to make the Olympics, and she finished, I think, 4th one year, so just missed. And she'd remind herself, like, no one gives a shit about track and field. And you have to do that, because contrary to the Instagram bros out there that tell you, like, go all in and care so deeply that it hurts, if you care so deeply that it hurts, your brain often hits the eject button. So you want to care enough where it's important, right? Where you can override that central governor, but not care so much where your brain thinks the best course of action is to escape. So there's that fine line there. And I think having the ability to zoom out and create perspective, whether you're an amateur or a pro, is a vital skill to deal with the nerves.
Yeah, or care so much and be curious about it, as we talked about on prior episodes too. So it's like, yeah, I care deeply, but it's just part of this like self-discovery as an athlete and as a person. And whether I blow up or have the race of my life, it's just another data point in the self-discovery and the path of growth that I'm going on, versus I want to be able to say I'm a 239 marathoner, because that's going to make me whole. It'll make you whole on the Let's Run billboard, but guess what? You go 239, there's the 229 assholes that think you're slow. You go 229, totally. Then you get the 219 assholes, and there's even some 209 assholes. I think they're anonymous AI bots, the armchair 209ers, but you got to be careful.
I just want to add 2 things on this. I want to pick up on your self-discovery point, but I also want to go back to nerves really quick. The other thing that maybe it's obvious, so it's not worth stating, but I'm going to state it anyway. The other thing that really helps with nerves, they don't make them go away, but it's just a nice thing to have in your back pocket, is if you've done the preparation, right? And that's one of the great things about the marathon, is you've done a 14, 16 week training block, whatever your training block is. And so you're going to feel the nerves, but if you've done the prep, then you can be like, okay, I'm going to feel the nerves right up until the gun. And then I know I'm going to be okay because I did the prep. I've had this exact same experience with public speaking. Like, I actually think I do pretty well public speaking, but I'm so nervous. I'm like a nervous wreck, but I relentlessly prepare. Like, I do it in the mirror. I'll do it multiple times in the days leading up. And I get so nervous. And in the moment before I have to speak, I want to run away. I'm like, oh my God, no, don't make me do it. Don't make me do it. Don't make me do it. And then to Steve's point, when the gun goes off, I just start speaking and I'm like, oh, I've put in the reps. And so, some of this, you need the experience, obviously. But in those moments where I'm like drowning in nerves, I think the reason it doesn't tip into dread is because I know in the back of my mind, I've done the prep. And so if you go to the marathon and you haven't done the prep, then you might tip into dread because you don't have that to rely on, right? The other thing I'll say about the self-discovery point is I was looking back to some of my notes before I've run marathons, and I ran Paris a couple years ago, and I was so nervous I couldn't even sleep the night before. I was like a total wreck, and I had a great coach, by the way. Shout out Coach Rebecca Stowe, who that was when she taught me about the night before. The night before is what matters. It doesn't really matter if you sleep the night before. But I looked at my journals, and the morning before the race, something I wrote that I thought was interesting was I was like, take your self-worth out of this race. Like, you don't need to prove anything. You've already proved it by doing the training. Now just go out there and like get curious and rip it. To use your words, Brad, like, make it an act of self-discovery. I ended up hitting my goal. It was a great race. I pushed through some hard things. And I think that's like maybe something that was helpful for me and maybe be helpful for other people too, is like, once you've done the prep, you've done all the work, and you get up to the starting line of whatever the thing is, whether it's a literal marathon or not, don't put your self-worth on trial, right? Like, you've done all the work. You've proved to yourself what you need to prove to yourself. Just go out there and like see what happens. It's an easy thing to say, hard thing to do. But if you can like not put yourself on trial and not make it about proving something, I think that frees you up to have a lot more fun and curiosity and joy.
And don't make it all or nothing. Like, you're probably going to run more than one marathon. If you're a runner, you're going to speak more than one time, and not every time is going to be an A. If you do it for long enough, you're going to have B's and C's and hopefully no D's or F's, but like, you're not always going to have it. And that's okay, again, because like, it's about the long-term progression over time. And it's about who you're becoming as an athlete, who you're becoming as a speaker, who you're becoming as a physician, who you're becoming as a writer. And I feel like the people that only race once are the people that put all their eggs in that one basket, and then they psych themselves out. It doesn't go well, so they quit sport. Instead of being like, great, I'm a runner, runners race. Let's see what happens. We're going to do this more than once.
I think this is a great segue and example of also having multiple goals going into your race. Because if you just have one singular goal, you're all or nothing, as Brad just said. Guess what happens? If you fall even a little bit off, your brain goes, hit the eject button, man. Our goal is gone. This isn't worth it. Why are we still doing this thing? Right? And you see this, and I've experienced this. When my goal was to break the 4-minute mile, literally I could come through 1,200 meters and see that clock go like 2:59, 3 flat, 3:01. If I came through at 3:01, my brain would be like, it's over, man. Are you going to run 58? And the reality is, yeah, sometimes I probably could have run 58, but your brain is going, you're off the goal. Like, hit the eject button, because the goal is so narrow and so stringent when you're trying to break a 4-minute mile. Maybe this is why I never did, because I couldn't expand my goals. But the point is, when you're racing, we want to have multiple goals. And that not only applies to just time goals, but I also think that applies to process goals or experience goals. Man, what are you trying to get out of this? Who are you trying to become? What is the point you showed up to run this race? Even professionals will have goals that are essentially like, I'm running the freaking New York City Marathon. I've never run the New York City Marathon before. I want to experience it. I want to come off the bridge and hear the roar of the crowd and make it feel like deafening, right? I want to go up the hills at the end and see if I can do it, right? I want to be with this pack of amazing men or women and join the fraternity of other folks who have run through one of the biggest cities in the world. Like, you have to have some sort of process-oriented goal that isn't tied to an outcome, because even if your outcomes go away, you still have this thing that centers you and grounds you and says, you know what, doesn't matter how fast I'm going, I still wanted to see if I could conquer those hills in the last part of either Boston or New York or whatever it is, and give that effort to prove, regardless of if it's 6-minute pace or 9-minute pace, that I can get through this, right? So have that multitude of goals. Unlike on the internet where they say go all in, and or go big or go home. That does not work in the real world. It just sets you up for going home early because your brain takes it out.
Yeah, the research term for this is a hierarchy of goals. And at the top of a hierarchy ought to be the person that you want to become. And then underneath that are your values. What values do you want to embody? And then underneath that are goals that let you practice those values. And that all ladders up to the person that you want to become. And the person that you want to become goal is really just about the experience and what you gain from it. But then you can also at the same time have a very objective performance related goal. And on a great day, you get both. And on a not so great day, hopefully you at least get one of the two. And that can work the other way too. Sometimes you run your 2:59 and you're miserable and you're stressed the whole time and you don't enjoy the race. And, you're not necessarily like thriving and having a great experience, but you hit your time target. Other times you miss your time target, but you're able to salvage the experience. And the best days, again, are when you have both.
Great. I think that was, we made quick work of goals. I like that a lot. Let's get into I think one of the cool things about the marathon is how much of a playground. And again, I don't know why this word's coming up for me a lot today, but a laboratory for like experiencing riding that red line of like, what's the maximum you can do and sort of being like, how long can I stay here without tipping off, falling over the edge, managing difficulty, discomfort for an extended period of time. So I think we can maybe go through some tools or like strategies people can use for handling that discomfort.
Sure, let's do it. There's a billion. I mean, a couple that I like, and I mentioned some of those, but I think when it gets really hard, even a couple miles seems like eternity. So you chunk it, you break it down. You say, I'm going to stay with this pack till we get to the next turn. And you're essentially just bargaining with yourself. But essentially what you did is you gave your brain something manageable it could hang on to. It says, okay, I'm not doing this for 5 more miles. I'm just doing this for the half mile till we get to the aid station. And your brain goes, okay, I'll let you stay on a little bit longer. So, and what we find out often is that we can kind of bargain with ourselves till we get close enough where we can smell the finish line, and then the finish line energy takes over. Okay. I think other things that work really well are realizing that, we talked about sharing the load, that it's not just you out there, and that this run or event has a greater purpose. So often I'll have athletes dedicate a mile to someone who helped them along the way, right? That could be a coach, a parent, a loved one. And you just say, hey, mile 21's for Jemmy because like Jemmy helped me get to this point. And you get to think about that. So it's not just woe is me, you suffering here, but you're like, hey, I'm fighting for Jemmy on this one. Okay. The other thing that you can do is use the people around you. Often when we think share the load, as we said, great, it's teammates. No, it's humans. You can come up on someone and say, hey, I know we're at mile 21, but we got this. Let's ride together. Come with me. Let's drag them around. Or as I like to tell athletes is sometimes your brain will listen if you tell the other person what you need to hear, which is like, hey, relax and fight. You can do this or whatever it is. And your brain goes like, oh, yeah, I need to hear that too. Let's go. And often your brain also goes like, oh, crap, I can still talk. I must not be hurting that bad. I'm not that out of breath. Like I still got this thing, right? And then the last thing that I'll say on a tool that might sound a little bit crazier, I'll give you 2 more, is sometimes you just do something crazy in the moment and it shocks yourself out of the system, right? I'll tell people, hey, if it's hurting really bad and you're going backwards, then at the next aid station, I want you to swish and spit some carbs, which we talked about last time, which can sometimes, elevate you. But then I want you to surge for 30 seconds. And you're like, why would I surge when I'm hurting? And I'll tell you, you can do anything for 30 seconds. So what happens, you surge for 30 seconds, and then you're like, oh, the 30 seconds is done. I can slow down. You end up feeling a little bit better and you slow down into a faster pace because you've almost like shocked your body into saying, oh, I could still run somewhat fast. So much of this is like playing with your mind and showing it that you're not spiraling, that it's not the end of the world, that you're not running out of gas, that you still have more in the tank. And you've got to just play with the goals. You got to play with how much time you have left. You got to play with like what you're focused on. You play with all these variables to just like inch yourself closer and closer to the finish line until you can realistically tell yourself, hey, I've got 5K to go. And guess what? If someone told me to run 5K yesterday, I'd be like, piece of cake. I can run a 5K at any point, at any time of the year. Well, guess what? Everything else but is behind me. I got 5K. I can figure it out.
And if you completely blow up, then like you completely blow up, and these aren't even questions that you have to ask, right? Because like you're just blown up. Your body's gonna tell you if you're really at the limit, and if you can negotiate with yourself, then it means that there's more there. Your body tells you when you can't negotiate with yourself, and then that's when you walk it in, or that's when you really slow down. But if you're thinking about whether or not you should slow down, then there's a negotiation to be had, and you got to play that negotiation before you just give in.
It's the central governor, baby. It's gonna shut us down when we're running really close to empty. And if you're literally not being shut down, then you keep negotiating, you keep bargaining. And the other thing that I'd say as well as a tool, sometimes when you're not quite at that blow up, but it's coming, is like, look at the crowd. Like, take your mind off the race and just be like, hey, I'm going to read the signs. I'm going to look for the idiot going nuts to try and cheer me up when I'm miserable. I'm going to high five the people. I'm going to enjoy the moment as best I can, maybe even while walking. And like, you take your pain off the thing because you're like already crossed the red line and there's nothing really you can do to keep negotiating because it's going south. And you just do your best to kind of enjoy the moment in a horrible, terrible situation.
That reminds me, and it's funny because I should be the last one telling endurance sports stories, but this is going to be a full circle moment. That reminds me of Ironman Arizona, where your boy went sub 10, and I'll get to why that's important. I went 9:54. People can't believe it. Look it up on Athlinks. This is no super shoes. This is before the bikes had motors. You know, this
will say it's fake.
This 9:54 is probably good for like 9:40 today. Okay, and I distinctly remember at mile 24, like really being like, all right, the negotiation's over here. Like there's not much left. And then you just tune into the crowd. And like literally the crowd carried me for the last 2 miles. The reason that this is full circle is I almost forgot to mention this because I almost forgot that I went 9:54 at Ironman Arizona. And at the time, as a younger, less mature grad student, being a sub 10 Ironman was like the only thing that mattered. If I'm a sub 10 Ironman, like I've arrived. I can go on those billboards and I might not be fast, but I'm no longer slow. Like I'm good. And I truly hadn't mentioned that for the last 3 years. Like I forgot about it until this conversation. And at the time it was everything. And I think like that's the perspective that we were talking about earlier too. And for young me, it was everything. And that's great. And it's on my path. And like now I've done other things. But man, if I could have known at the time that I would be forgetting about it, I would have probably gone 10 minutes faster because I wouldn't have been so stressed. Now I need to look up my time to make sure that I'm not lying before the internet gets me.
No, we need the internet to come at you. That'll get us the views.
All right, I'm pulling this up while you guys go on. We're finding my result. It's a little bit scary that it's not showing up. Am I just hallucinating all of this, guys?
I'll throw a few tools in here. A few of these will be very runner specific, but the larger thing that it ladders up to is getting out of your head, right? And if you're focused on your pain.
Oh, wait. Sorry, Clay. This is important. I don't want to get grilled by the comment section. I did not go 9:54. I went 9:55:45. Still sub 10, but not 9:54. I guess I still really wanted that, you know, the 10s, the 5s, like deep down in my head, I'm still insecure. So I rounded down to 9:54.
Well, what I was going to say is, this ladders up to the idea of getting out of your head. If like when you're locked in that thing, like I'm in pain. Can I do this? One that I've really helped me is just counting, just simply counting. Every time my right foot hits the ground, I count 1, 2, 3, and I'll just go up to 100 and then start over. And you can't do that the whole race, obviously, but it is remarkable to me sometimes. Like if I'm really in that, like, oh God, I don't know if I can sustain this, and I just count. It's amazing how quickly it just gets me out of that story and that spiral of like, I can't do this, and just locks me into like how my body's feeling as it's moving. And I find I usually have a little bit more juice there. Two other very high, like very running specific ones are sometimes I'll take like 2 really sharp inhales and an exhale. Like if I'm especially on a hill, like 2 inhales to the nose, 1 big exhale out the mouth. And then, the other thing I try to remember also is just like, there's a quote I like from Joseph Goldstein, who's a meditation teacher, who says that doubt is very loud and often masquerades as wisdom. And just like trying to remember that in those moments when you're telling yourself, like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can do this. It's sort of like, remember in school when like kids would get on the PA system and maybe like prank and say something? I'm sort of like, oh, someone let Doubt get on the PA system and he's like blaring to the school speakers. But it doesn't mean we got to listen to him, like try to just stay here, see how long you can hold on to this discomfort, and it might transform, right? It might go away, it might abate, it may not, it may get worse. You may lose a hamstring or a quad, but like just give it a chance to change before you pull the ripcord. All right, let's talk about failing. You don't meet your goal, you finish, you're really bummed out. What are some strategies people can have for navigating that and not getting too down on themselves?
I think the first step is acceptance and understanding that it sucks. You trained a long time for a big event and it didn't go well and you're gonna feel pretty shitty and there's nothing you can do about that for a short period of time. I think the key, or one of several keys, is you got to define that period of time. Often we talk about 24 or 48 hour rule. Sometimes the marathon will be longer. But give yourself time to wallow and then give yourself time to get back and do something that you enjoy. That could be back to training or walking or jogging. It could be back to something else in your life that gives you that mastery and that fulfillment. But having some time to just set that defined period where you feel it, you experience it, and then you say, okay, I'm not going to stay here forever. And then eventually, what I like to do as a coach is set a period of time where we're going to reflect and we're going to take something forward from it. Normally, I don't reflect right after. I'm not going up to someone who bombed a marathon and be like, oh, if you would have done this at mile 12 and we should have trained this way. No. You have that conversation like a week or maybe 2 weeks later, right? And you have that conversation and the whole goal of it is to put it in perspective, meaning you didn't waste your training. Okay, even if you didn't hit your goal, you experienced something, you became something, you learned something, you challenged yourself. You didn't waste it. Okay. And then the other key is, what are we carrying this forward for? What are we learning from this? What are we taking forward? After every marathon, sat with some runner and said, you know what? Great. We learned that, X, Y, and Z. We need to focus on fueling more. Or you do great on this, but we might need to add this to your long runs. We have something that essentially gives us something concrete to do, which I think is important because it gives us hope for a different future next go round.
I'm curious to wrap up here. I wonder if we've talked about a lot of them just in the course of this episode, but if there's sort of like a big lesson or some other way you think that like marathon or any sort of endurance training has a teaching for life, I can start. I'll offer up just what amazes me about a marathon block is like, it just teaches you how much you can do in a relatively short period of time with a little bit of intention, planning, and consistency, right? Like you take 16 weeks and you lay out all your workouts and you try to do most of them and do most of them well, but you don't need to do all of them. You can probably get there by doing like somewhere from 85 to 90%, maybe even 80 to 90%. And then after 16 weeks, like you can run 26 miles. It's pretty unbelievable, right? And I think that applies to so much of life. It goes back to that idea of like present you doing future you a favor, just like sitting down and being like, what do I want? How do I get there? What's the method of me getting there? How can I hold myself accountable that I'm consistent to take the steps of that method to get there? And then you can do so much. And like, even with running, like you're not even running that much every day, right? Like your long runs take a long time, but with a little bit of intention, planning, consistency every day, you can just do a lot over a period of time.
Love it. I think the consistency part especially is so important because you said like, even if you're 80%, sometimes even 70%, you get there. The key is being consistent over those 16 weeks. And a part of being consistent over 16 weeks is being flexible day to day, that like not every workout has to go 100% to plan. And then the other thing that I think is just so important that came up in today's conversation already is impermanence. And just like how you can feel like shit at mile 7 and then feel great at mile 14 and then feel like shit again at mile 19 and then feel strong at mile 25. And the only thing that assures that you're not going to feel better when you're feeling like shit is if you fixate on feeling like shit. There's some good research in the mental health world that shows that one of the predictors of what leads from like a transitory couple days of feeling like crap to something that is maybe more chronic and needs a higher level of care is fixating on feeling like crap. So a good therapist is going to say like, oh yeah, I'm feeling depressed this afternoon. That sucks. Maybe I'll feel this way tomorrow, but maybe not. Whereas if the minute that you feel depressed, you're like, oh no, I'm depressed. I need to get out of this. What can I do to get out of this? This is going to be forever. That predicts that you'll stay in that negative state. And it feels a little trite to be comparing a marathon to depression, but a rough mile 7, you have a choice, right? You can either fixate on that rough mile 7 and then assure that the rest of the race is going to be tough, or you can say, mile 7 feels like shit. Let me get to the next aid station. Let me do a steep swisheroo of the Gatorade, take a gel, maybe get some caffeine on board, and then have an open mind about what miles 9, 10, 11 are going to feel like.
I think the marathon explains life.
Yeah.
So,
how did I know we'd get here?
This is all that matters.
Steve's two daughters are named Paris and Berlin after two of theirs.
They are not. But I know friends who have named similar things after running things. Kudos to them. But I think marathon running is a perfect metaphor for life. It's why everyone in the world should read Once a Runner and understand the trial of miles. But in all reality, what do you learn? You think that this is an individual sport, and then you get in the race and you realize, no, it's about the togetherness, right? You think it's about racing other people, and then you realize, no, it's not necessarily about the competition. It's about like finding my own capabilities and exploring my potential in how good I can become. You think it's about winning, but it's about process. You think it's about the race itself, but it's actually about the 16 weeks and the changing yourself that Clay alluded to. There are so many freaking lessons about life that comes from the marathon. And all I'm going to say is that kudos to everyone who's showing up and giving it a go in New York City or whatever fall race you're running. And it's not just about the marathon, because in this group, I think I'm the only person who has not raced a marathon. Every other race is just as cool and sometimes cooler. So have at it in all your physical pursuits.
There you go. You should be taking your marathon advice from me and Clay, not Steve, and see what happens.
Well, Steve, you're not the only one to think that. Eliud Kipchoge, greatest marathoner of all time, he once said, marathon is life and life is marathon. He also said about Brad's book, Practice of Groundedness, this book is not just about molding you as a runner, but molding you as a human being. I hope that today, if you listen to this and you're a runner or not a runner, you feel that we helped mold you as a human being, hopefully in some positive way. We are really trying to grow this show. We're new to YouTube. Some of you here watching this are probably new. Thank you for listening to us, joining our community. As Steve said, we like doing this together, not individually. If you enjoy the show, you want to support us, best thing you can do is share it, whether that's on Spotify, Apple, YouTube. Just send it to someone you think would benefit from this. Again, maybe they're a runner, they're a marathoner, maybe they're not. But we really want to grow this. We want to do this project together with each other and with you. And so we ask, that is the best way to support us.
We also really want feedback. We want ideas for the show. If you're listening on your favorite podcast app, just shoot Clay an email at clay.growtheq@gmail.com.
It's in the show notes if you need it.
In the show notes, we want to hear your feedback. We want to hear ideas. If you are on YouTube, another failure of the growth equation in excellence actually is convincing Steve to run the marathon. I've been at this for the last 4 years. I've even tried to find a deadlift equivalent calculator to make him think I'm coming for him in athletic prowess. He says no, but maybe with enough peer pressure, we can get Steve to run the marathon. Maybe he will even document his training and share it with all of you. So let's hear it in the comments. Let's peer pressure Steve into finally running a marathon.
If you're running the marathon this weekend, good luck. I'll be out there. So if you're rooting runners on in New York, look me up, yell something at me, Steve Swisheroo, something like that. That'll get my attention. I'd love to have some energy out there. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode. As always, take care of yourselves and be excellent to each other.